Welcome back. Here with us on Mirror Now on Urban Debate at 9. Our focus is rising tension between Russia and Ukraine. A lot has happened over the last few hours. The world fears an all-out war. Stocks are falling and oil and gas prices are climbing. Not a good news for COVID-hit global economy. While till last week there was at least some hope of de-escalation. Now Russia's latest action has got the world worried. Russian President Vladimir Putin first ordered his troops to enter two pro-Russian rebel-held areas in eastern Ukraine after recognizing them as independent states. Now this amid criticism from European leaders. Putin says his troops in Ukraine would be peacekeepers. United States of America has called it nonsense. US President Joe Biden has ordered sanctions on Russia-backed Ukraine regions. Germany has halted the Russian-German Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline project. UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson has announced a barrage of sanctions against Russia. European Commission has called Russia's aggression as illegal and unacceptable. Now, as per a statement by Russia's foreign ministry, it was the only solution Russia felt compelled to take. And for now, Russia is not planning to send troops to East Ukraine. But Ukraine is already mulling breaking off diplomatic ties with Putin's Russia. India, viewers, however, has called for restraint on all sides. India is concerned about the safety of over 20,000 Indian students and nationals living in Ukraine. One Air India flight was sent today to Ukraine to bring back Indians who wish to come back. And do the actions of Putin indicate that Russia is invading Ukraine? That's going to be our key focus on Urban Debate this evening. What should be India's response? Let's try and understand from our guests who are joining us on the broadcast this evening. We have with us Sofiya Fedyna, who is Member of Parliament, joining us live from Ukraine. Captain Alok Bansal, Director, Indian Foundation, is live with us. Ashok Sajjanhar, former ambassador, is live with us too. Vishnu Prakash, former ambassador, will be joining us. Dr. Swasti Rao, Associate Fellow, Europe and Eurasia Centre, MP IDSA, also joining us. Thank you very much, all of you, for joining us here on Urban Debate on Mirror Now this evening. Ambassador Sajjanhar, I want to begin the discussion with you. Given the kind of statements that have come from Russia earlier about how Putin ordered troops into the eastern part of Ukraine, and later a statement by the Foreign Ministry of Russia suggesting that for now the troops won't be sent. What do you make of these kind of statements? Is a war now inevitable in your view?
You know, Heena, I think the first step as far as the war is concerned has already been taken by sending these troops into the Donbass region and declaring both these provinces rebel-held. Part of these provinces were held by the rebels, not the whole provinces. But now what Russia has done is declared both of them, Donetsk and Luhansk, as independent states and sent its military. Earlier, its soldiers used to be present without wearing the Russian army insignia, but now they have gone formally. And they have said that they are going there as peacekeepers. Now, peacekeepers keeping peace against what? Because after all, the only troops that are surrounding this area are the Russian troops. There are no other troops as such, because in Ukraine, obviously, there are only the Ukrainian troops, but those are defensive forces. They are not aggressive forces. It is only from the side of Russia, the eastern border of Ukraine, on the Russian side, that they have amassed more than 100,000 soldiers there. In the Belarus-Ukraine border, they have amassed anything between 30 to 50,000 troops. And then on the southern side, in the Black Sea, there are about 30 warships that have been undergoing military drills and war drills there. So I think the only troops that are surrounding Ukraine are from Russia. So I think it is basically trying to pull, wool over the eyes of the international community when Russia tries to suggest that there is a provocation from Ukraine. Meaning, how can anyone imagine that there would be provocation from a small country which, in terms of its military strength, capacity, capability, cannot match Russia at all? And it is NATO, it is the United States and all the other European powers. They have said that they will not put their boots on the ground. They will not send their soldiers on Ukrainian territory to fight the Russians. So I think it would be extremely foolhardy, to put it mildly, for Ukraine to take any provocative steps, any provocative measures. And I must, whatever I've heard of President Volodymyr Zelensky, I think he has been very restrained and he's been always asking for diplomacy, dialogue to settle the issue.
And why is it that Putin wants Ukraine so badly? We'll discuss that point as well in just a bit. Ambassador Sajanhar, stay on with us. Sofiya Fedyna is live with us, Member of Parliament from Ukraine, joining us this evening. Sofiya, thank you very much for joining us here on Mirror Now. Firstly, can you tell us how the situation really is as we speak in Ukraine? Because earlier the statement from the Russian president suggested that troops have been sent to eastern Ukraine, but now there is a statement from the Russian ministry suggesting that for now no troops will be sent. So what is the situation on the ground right now?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for the interest in Ukrainian situation and for this definite moment. There are Moscow troops in Ukraine on the temporarily occupied territories of Donetsk and Luhansk region. They invaded yesterday. There were the columns of troops that invaded the moment the Putin declared his speech and signed the recognition of the so-called fake republics. Furthermore, as I get the information from Special Operation Forces, I take care as a volunteer since 2014 on the front line with on the line with the so-called fake republics. They have already placed the rocket launchers to try, maybe in the future, to shoot on the territory of Ukraine. What we have to understand, and I'm really thankful for the position of Mr. Ambassador, that Ukraine had never invaded anyone. And this century, Ukraine was only protecting itself. In 2014, Moscow Federation troops annexed Crimea. They forced people to recognize Crimea as an independent entity. Then they occupied Donetsk and the Luhansk region. They killed more than 14,000 of people, both military and civilians. We have 1.5 million refugees. In Ukrainian counts, it's really, really a lot. And now you ask the question, what Moscow Federation, what Putin wants? They do not want Ukraine to exist. And they will not stop with this recognition of fake republics and occupation of our territories. The problem is that Putin will move on. He does not need democracy. He does not need the cooperation among democratic countries. And that's what we need to understand. One more problem I would like to state, that we have now a question whether the Western countries will implement sanctions. What I understand, that they were waiting for a bloodshed, for full military intervention. But yesterday's recognition in their position was not an intervention in its full scale. But what we can see, the recognition of these fake republics, the Moscow Federation administrative entities, this was already infringement of Ukrainian territorial integrity and sovereignty. And if we do not impose sanctions, the massacre and the bloodshed will continue, as we have already for 8 years.
In fact, Ms. Sofiya, over the last few hours, we have seen, in a way, a barrage of sanctions really getting announced, at least by various countries. It started with the United States of America, then UK Prime Minister used this term, barrage of sanctions, and then other countries followed as well. Even European Commission has come out with a statement with a warning too. Do you think that's going to act as a deterrent? Do you think that can probably stop Russia? Because soon after this happened, we had a statement coming from the Foreign Ministry of Russia suggesting that, for now, the troops are not being sent to eastern Ukraine.
The question is that eastern Ukraine, Donetsk and Luhansk region are already partly occupied by Moscow Federation. And since 2014, we do have Moscow troops on our territory. What about sanctions? What will work to stop Nord Stream 2? That will definitely work. And we are thankful that the Chancellor Scholz put on a pause of this gas pipeline. What will work is to put sanctions on Putin and the members of Council of Federation of Moscow Federation who voted for the recognition of the fake republics. What will not work is the sanctions against fake republics, as it was stated by some leaders, because these republics do not mean anything, not for Ukraine, not for Moscow Federation. And if we want to stop Moscow troops, we have to impose sanctions on them. And two more very important things. What we do need now, this is the air defense umbrella over Ukraine. This umbrella that will help us to withstand the air attack, possible attack from Moscow Federation. And one more thing is to raise up once again a question of peacekeepers, United Nations peacekeepers that should be invited on the temporarily occupied territory to take over control over Ukrainian Moscow border. And then we can start some kind of negotiations. People are really threatened there. People are afraid for their lives. And there are so many Moscow groups that people really do not know what to do in the situation.
So there is uncertainty among the people there in Ukraine as well. But Sofiya, requesting you to stay on with us. Ambassador Vishnu Prakash, what is your assessment of the situation as we have in front of us? And do you see these sanctions being announced by various countries acting as a deterrent for Russia?
I absolutely understand the plight of Ukraine, and Ukraine is paying the price of geography, so to say. It is caught between two powers, and there is this jostling between the two powers. Ukraine is caught in between, and to be honest, despite the lip service that is being paid, all powers are looking after their self-interest and not at Ukraine's interest. I would dare say that. What President Putin has done is certainly a provocation. There is no doubt about it. But let me for a moment be the devil's advocate. I'm not at all condoning it, but let me be the devil's advocate. The two areas, Donetsk and Luhansk, were already self-proclaimed breakaway territories. There was already a conflict going on. So there was a de facto, they were not a part of Ukraine. What Mr. Putin has done is to give it a status of a de jure. He has recognized that. So yes, it's a provocation, but question is that needs to be asked is that did he need 150,000 troops mobilization? Did he need so much of war exercises? If he wanted, he could have done that without even firing a bullet. He could have done that early on. Now, why is he doing that? I think it is to underwrite the resolve that Russia's security interests, and there is legitimate security interest, be recognized, because the West has not bothered much about Russia's security interests. And also, they have time and again rebuffed it and resorted to sanctions. The difference is that sanctions have proven not to work anywhere. Even they don't work against North Korea. Russia is a very big country. And let us also remember that in the last few years, Russia has salted away something like $650 billion in foreign exchange reserves. Russians, as the honorable MP from Ukraine will know, Russia is used to hardship. So, and their trade, commerce, and interface with the Western world is limited. So, yes, it would cause them pain, but it would also mean that the popularity rating of Putin will rise further because he will present himself as a nationalist who is trying to protect Russian interests. Last point that I would like to make is that I'm afraid the West has dropped the ball on the real adversary. The real adversary, in my view, is not Russia, it is not Soviet Union, doesn't pose that kind of a threat. The real adversary is China. But instead of going after the real adversary and engaging in some give and take, good old diplomatic negotiations, showing statesmanship instead of scoring brownie points, the West is trying to contain Russia, which I think is short-sighted.
Okay, interesting point you have made, Ambassador Prakash. Let me also quickly go across to Dr. Swasti Rao. The view is that sanctions have not really worked in the past as well. So how will they help in the current situation? But I am not able to then understand that if there is no fear of sanctions, why will the Foreign Ministry of Russia come out with a statement soon after these announcements of sanctions came from one country to the other, saying that, you know, troops won't be moved, at least for now?
Yeah, that's right.
Or we shouldn't read too much into it.
Yeah, that's right. See, I think, in my opinion, I mean, I agree largely with the points that Ambassador Sajjanahar and Ambassador Vishnu Prakash made. And also, you know, like the situation out there in Ukraine is really very worrying. As far as the question that you put across to me about sanctions, you see, the sanctions are definitely not something that Putin would go for in a rational world. There were some things, there were certain videos that had, you know, surfaced yesterday where he was giving this live interview on his, you know, to the TV, where he really sounded very irrational. Okay, so on the one hand, let me just assume that Putin understands that sanctions are not something that Russia would want in a rational world, but still he's worried, and at the same time he is also testing the resolve of the Western powers. Okay, so there is no getting away from the fact that for Putin it is like posturing, okay, like a tough posturing that he has in mind. As far as other things are concerned, you know, sanctions, I totally agree with Sofiya when she says that Nord Stream 2, you know, not getting the clearance was something that the Russians would really feel, because you see what they have been doing with Ukraine is that they've been trying to isolate Ukraine both strategically and economically. So what has come now is military and strategic, but you know, for decades they have been trying to isolate Ukraine economically, because the gas pipelines that used to go via Ukraine and give the transit fee were about 3% of Ukraine's GDP. Okay, and the entire debate about Nord Stream 2 is that why is Russia cutting off Ukraine and, you know, making them miss out on the transit fee? So it is a very well-known fact that Russia is trying to, you know, really isolate Ukraine internationally, strategically, as well as economically. And right. I also have to say that, you know, there are people, Russian, you know, statesmen have gone on record and said that they do not really believe in a country like Ukraine. So all of that kind of, you know, connects together. And right. Yes, they are worried, but at the same time, they will test the West's resolve, because they know the real elephant in the room, China, is behind them, you know.
Right. Interesting point there. Captain Alok Bansal, I'll come to you in just a bit. Let me also take quick comments from Ms. Sofiya. Can you help us understand how the situation is of the people on the ground right now?
If we talk about the people who are nearby the occupied territories, they are eager to protect themselves. And we've got a lot of data that more than 50% of people, both women and men, are ready with weapons to protect their country, and that goes to civilians. So people do not want to be any part of Moscow Federation. They want to be in Ukraine. The second part is that if to talk about the people in all the Ukraine, the 62% of Ukrainians want to become a part of NATO and want to be the part of Euro-Atlantic security environment. There is no panic. We know our enemy. We just demand from the authorities, from the president of Ukraine, to take the very strict actions and to decide what we do, because unfortunately right now on the highest level in Ukraine there's kind of uncertainty, and we do not know what exactly is going on. The president just said everything's going to be fine, but that is not the plan. So Ukrainians have very good plan from the 2014. In case something wrong is going on in our country, in case someone is trying to occupy us or invade, we help Ukrainian army. Nowadays, Ukrainian army is in the top 10 of European armies. If we start from 2014, we used to have only 5,000 soldiers, but now we have more than 255,000 Ukrainian army. In Indian context, it's small army, but for European continent, it's quite a lot. But what we need lethal weapon, and we need, as I stated before, the great support to close our sky, because we know that the Moscow Federation is very strong in air forces, and Ukraine has not so much. And what is much more important,
so you fear a full-fledged invasion now?
We already have this invasion, and we know how they kill our people, and we know how Moscow Federation tortures our people. We do have many political prisoners that are already for 8 years in prison, and we do not believe any statement of Putin, because he states that he wants peace, and the next day he bombs our children. And if something like that is going on, I think that he is insane. And I think democratic community should raise a question how to stop the right of veto vote in the United Nations Security Council for Moscow Federation, and how to expel Moscow Federation from the OSCE and Council of Europe parliamentary assemblies, because the country that infringes all the possible rights has no right to have a decision vote in what is going on in democratic world. There should be obstruction and, first of all, financial sanctions.
All right, Ms. Sofiya, appreciate you joining us here on Mirror Now and telling us about how the situation is right now in Ukraine. That was the Member of Parliament from Ukraine who joined us live this evening. Captain Alok Bansal, you heard, how the situation is right now. So probably last week when we got reports of the beginning of de-escalation, maybe were not true. And now the reality is that the invasion has happened. It is happening. And as Ambassador Sajjanhar mentioned, that first step towards a war has already been taken. What is your assessment?
See, we need to understand, firstly, the crisis has its genesis in the policies created during the Soviet era. If you actually look at it, the present boundaries of Ukraine, the present geographical entity called Ukraine is an artificial construct, constructed at different periods of Soviet era. Portions that were actually taken back from certain East European countries were added to Ukraine. Some of the Russian territory was transferred to Ukraine, including Crimea. And again, the 1991, with the disintegration of the Soviet Union, these breakaway Soviet republics came. And most of these Soviet republics, their boundaries are artificial constructs created during Soviet era artificially without any recourse to historical basis. Now what has happened is that the current genesis, the problem has its genesis in 2014, when a democratically elected president of Ukraine, Viktor Yanukovych, was thrown out. He was actually removed without following the constitutional norms. Now Viktor Yanukovych actually hails from Donetsk region, which is one of the two reasons which now Russia has recognized. And after, when he was overthrown, there were turbulence in these two provinces, that is Luhansk and Donetsk. And most of the part of, though territorially I think it is a very smaller portion, but most of the population of these two provinces uses Russian as their first language. And they actually, from that point of time, have declared their independence, and they have been backed by Russians. Though they may officially not claim so, but it is widely believed that many of the separatists were supported by militias, which were nothing but Russian soldiers coming out as civilians. Now, what has happened today is what was de facto recognition by the Russia of these two regions has now been made de jure. Now, as a result, what is possible is that now once you recognize these two entities as sovereign countries, these could request Russia to send troops, and which Putin would not consider as an aggression against Ukraine, and would send it to these two territories. And the part of these two people's social republics, this LPSR and DPSR, the territory which is still under Ukrainian control, could probably be targeted. And that is where the problem is. So when Putin says that no troops have been sent to eastern Ukraine, Now having recognized these two territories, that statement does not include these two states. So it's quite feasible that his troops may have already moved into these two so-called free republics. And this would create a huge problem, because unnecessarily it will pit Russia against the West. And this would affect the economies of both Europe as well as Russia and Ukraine, because all these countries will have to pay a heavy price, because 70% of Europe's energy needs today come from Russia, especially many of these developed countries. The gas comes from Russia, and it is at a very reasonable price as compared to the gas that is supplied
in the world is impacted by COVID pandemic. The economy is recovering, and here I'm talking about the global economy. No country would really, want a war at a situation like this. Ms. Sofiya, in fact, wanted to make a point while you were speaking, Captain Alok Bansal. Yes, Ms. Sofiya.
Yeah, thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. And I would like to oppose several theories I have heard. Ukraine is not an artificial entity, and it was not formed on the ruins of the Soviet Union. Ukraine proclaimed its independence in 1918 during the First World War, but that was the renewal of our independence. Ukraine in the medieval ages was the largest empire of Europe at the times when Moscow Federation and Moscovian country had never existed. In 2014, our president, so-called ex-president Yanukovych, he escaped from Ukraine after killing more than 100 people, peaceful protesters on Maidan. And then the parliament deprived him, together with a constitutional court, his presidential status. And then we've got constitutional and legal elections of the parliament and of the next president, Poroshenko. So please do not state that we are artificial statement. We are a democratic country that paid a lot and gave a lot of blood to have our future. And the Moscow Federation,
and we know, how things between Russia and Ukraine have been bad for quite some time now. It's just that the situation has escalated further now. Captain Bansal, will you like to respond quickly? Then I'll go across to Ambassador Satyapan.
I just wanted to clarify. I never said that Ukraine is an artificial entity. I only said that the current boundaries of Ukraine, as they exist, have no basis on history. When was Crimea under Ukraine, as Ukraine claims, or many of these provinces which are today part of Ukraine have Russian-speaking population. Similarly, certain parts in western Ukraine were part of the East European countries in history. I'm not trying to say that they were never part of Ukraine, because countries in Europe have actually, their geographical frontiers have actually transformed from time to time. Countries like Poland, etc., have transformed their boundaries, they have shifted borders. So these two particular provinces which have been recognized today, and I'm not trying to justify the Russian action, I'm only trying to say that these were the two provinces where the former president had huge support. He actually hailed from one of these provinces, Viktor Yanukovych, and when
they were always considered pro-Russia. That's the perception clearly the world had. Interesting points you both have made, and Captain Bansal has clarified his point as well. Now, Ambassador Sajjanhar, amidst all of this, the focus is also how India is looking at this situation. Do you expect India to say something during the EU ministerial, considering how, vociferously other countries are talking about their opinion on this issue?
Yeah, thank you very much, Heena, for that question. Before I respond, if you permit, I'll just, make a very brief couple of points on the debate that we've been having. You know what Captain Alok Bansal said, that the boundaries are artificial. But then that would not be the case only as far as Ukraine is concerned. You look at so many of the other states which were a part of the Soviet Union and which are independent countries, sovereign countries today. And many of them, and if the yardstick or the guideline or the determining factor is how many of them speak Russian, then more than 20% of the population of Kazakhstan speaks Russian. There are about 30% who speak Russian in Latvia, in Estonia. That doesn't mean that, it gives a right to Mr. Putin to go and start acquiring all those territories because they speak Russian. So I think, these irredentist tendencies of countries to reclaim the territories that were supposed to be with them in the past, I think that has to be severe, that has to be restrained, that has to be checked. Because if you start going back in history, Crimea, we know 1954, what happened, etc. That's a different, but otherwise, all these, if you say that these boundaries are artificial, but Putin himself, in his article, whether it is in 2021 or even in 2006, he has called Ukrainian people as brothers and as the real home of the Russia. The Kyievsky Rus was the origin from where it all started. So I think we can go back into history, but then we'll have to go really back. Then one point that I would like to make,
yes.
I agree with what Dr. Swasti Rao said about the efficacy of the sanctions. I think sanctions, we need to recognize they're a double-edged sword. And Russia is one country that has really been dealing with sanctions all through its existence. So I think it is used to dealing with sanctions. So if Nord Stream 2, not licensing it, if it hurts Russia, it's going to hurt Europe also. I think that needs to be recognized and needs to be taken on board. And I think the other point that has been made, that the real threat to world peace, security, prosperity is China. And that is where, whether it is the United States or the other countries, democracies, they need to be focusing on. Now, coming very quickly to the question, to the point that you have made, we have always...
So, with your permission, before you answer that question of mine, I want to also quickly take a response from Dr. Swasti Rao, because I think even she wanted to respond on the point that we've discussed just now. Yes, Dr. Swasti Rao.
Surely.
Thank you, Ambassador. It was just in continuation with what Sofiya was saying, and then what Ambassador, Sajanhar kind of reiterated. See, we need to understand a few things, that in Eastern Europe, there were three basic, European security architecture that held it together. I'm just referring to the Eastern Europe, point right now. One was the NATO-Russia, agreement of '97. The other was the Budapest, memorandum on guarantees, on security guarantees. Again, I think 94, Sofiya may correct me, I think 94, yeah. And the third was the Normandy format, where we had the Minsk, agreements, especially the second one. So, basically that this entire fragile, balance of Eastern Ukraine and what all Russia does, it kind of rested on these three. And what Russia has done is that Russia has completely flouted. Russia has completely shredded the Minsk II agreement, in the worst possible manner. Having said that, yes, they do stand for the format, the Normandy formats and talks. So that is something that we need to keep in mind. The second thing I want to say, as far as Russian population is concerned, see, it's a very valid point. Russia wants guarantees against NATO's eastward expansion. But at the same time, Russia is also, doing all sorts of hybrid warfare in Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia. Georgia wants to join the NATO. Ukraine wants to join the NATO. Now, because of what Russia has been doing with Ukraine, Sweden and Finland are also mulling. Countries that have been neutral all this while. So it is something which is devoid of logic. If Russia does not want NATO to expand, then why is Russia doing all this hybrid warfare to all these neighbors? It is pushing these neighbors in the lap of NATO, isn't it? So this is something which doesn't really make sense. It is about, it is about just telling the world that, look, I'm here and you have to take me seriously. Otherwise, I can be as irrational as I want. It's something like that. Yeah.
But now, we need to talk about the impact this is having on India. So, Ambassador Sajanhar, will you like to respond to the question that I asked you earlier? Do you expect India now to say something? Because there is EU ministerial as well. We have Mr. Jaishankar there. Do you expect India to just say something, or you will expect India to, still be in a wait and watch kind of a mode?
Heena, I don't think that India has been adopting a wait and watch approach or position. I think we have been very direct, we have been very clear, we have been very robust, but we have been very measured in our, and very balanced and sober in our approach, because we have this is not only because of the reason that we have strategically, we have excellent relations with both the Russian Federation as well as with the United States, and we would like this whole issue to be settled through discussion, through dialogue, through diplomacy, through talk. So this is right from the beginning we have been suggesting at all the UN Security Council meetings, because India today is also a non-permanent member of the UNSC. And even last evening, what happened, we have mentioned that we would like maximum restraint to be exercised, because a war is going to help no one. There are going to be no victors in the war. Everyone is going to lose, not only the countries which are involved, but also the whole world is going to be a loser, because we have seen just today itself that this movement of Russian troops that has taken place into the eastern Ukraine region, that the energy prices have continued to rise.
Right.
Stock markets around the world have tanked. And again, coming back to the point that was made, we are taking our eyes off China, which is the basic, which is the most potent threat to world peace and security. So once this is settled to the satisfaction of the countries, and we are able to restore semblance of peace and stability, then I think the countries concerned and international organizations also can get around to dealing with China, rather than expending their energies on this unnecessary confrontation.
Okay. Ambassador Vishnu Prakash, do you think this measured, balanced sort of an approach, by India that has been there so far can really continue at a time when countries, all of them, most of them, in fact, are speaking loudly about what they think about the entire situation and how sanctions are being announced as well?
Sorry, I was muted.
Could you unmute yourself, sir, Ambassador Prakash?
Yeah, I unmuted myself. There is not one, not two, but three narratives, and depends on whom you are listening to, whom you believe. There is one narrative which is coming out of London and Washington, one narrative which is coming from Europe, and one from Moscow. Now, the fact is that when there is a situation like this, there is one casualty, and that is facts, and that is truth. Everybody puts out what they want to say. What is the solution? Is conflict a solution? Their countries are nuclear, they are armed with nuclear weapons, they can destroy the world many times over. Is that a solution? Or the solution is to sit down and discuss and agree on some give and take. Now, world's problems are sorted out by negotiations, by talking with each other, not at each other or not past each other. What are we seeing? Certain Western countries talk peace, but then they threaten Russia. Russia has its self-respect. It has always been wanted to be treated with respect. And that is what is happening. Now, we look at the numbers. One day, the West says that there are 100,000 soldiers. One day, it's 130,000. Within 3 days, it is 190,000. Who knows what is the actual number? 3 days ago, President Zelensky himself had said, oh, the West is saying that the invasion is imminent. Please give me proof. That was President Zelensky himself asking. So that is the kind of challenge that obtains. The solution is to step back. The solution is not to precipitate crisis. The solution is not to engage in brinkmanship any longer. I would like to believe that Russia will only lose if it were to invade Ukraine. They will not get anything. So why would Russia invade? Their purpose was and will remain their security. And let us also accept that, or we may debate it, but I need to say that if the Monroe Doctrine applies to USA, where they say that Western Hemisphere is their zone of influence, sphere of influence, now other countries also have their sphere of influence. India also has their sphere of influence. So let us recognize that there is the reality and then there is rhetoric. We can either talk realpolitik, or we can engage in rhetoric. The choice is to be made by the big powers. But Ukraine is caught between the two sides, and I hope that they don't suffer anymore.
Okay, well, absolutely. Conflict is not a solution, not something that the world really wants at this point in time, especially at a time when, we're all limping back to economic recovery. And here I'm talking about all the countries. Captain Alok Bansal, now, there is going to be a direct impact for India because the energy prices are rising. Stock markets are literally bleeding every single day. This morning also when Sensex opened, it saw a cut of about 1,000 odd points. Is there anything India can do to, maybe protect itself or insulate itself?
See, India as a member of the Security Council may try and mediate, though I don't really see anything would come out of it, because the crisis affects India in many ways. It's not purely economic crisis where energy prices are going up. Please understand, any growing tension between Russia and the West will push Russia closer to the China, which is again not a desirable thing, because if a new Cold War emerges with Russia and China as allies and the West aligned with India, we'll be in the front lines of the new emerging Cold War, which is not desirable. It is from India's point of view highly desirable that we remain friendly with Russia, and Russia-China Sino-Russian axis, which is likely to form if the pressure continues on Russia, does not emerge.
Right.
And to that extent, we could probably try and see if we could mediate between the two warring sides, though at this juncture it looks extremely difficult, because US and UK have taken a very hardcore position, which they are not going to be affected. It is the rest of the European countries who are likely to suffer, and they are the ones as a result who are very keen to mediate. Unfortunately, this decision by President Putin of recognizing these republics at this point has put immense pressure on those European countries also, which are trying to mediate. So I think one needs to talk to both the parties and try and bring out some sort of a rapprochement. The West needs to give an assurance that Ukraine and Georgia will not join NATO. The eastward expansion of NATO is, to my mind, is unacceptable to any Russian and is not desirable for the global peace. In fact, certain assurances were given to Russia earlier, which need to be respected.
All right. Thank you very much, all of you, for joining us here on Urban Debate on Mirror Now this evening. It was a very interesting discussion. We got to understand how the situation is and the options that are there in front of us. Thank you very much, all of you, for joining us. In fact, a Ukrainian journalist, Olena Tregub, is also now joining us from the capital city to bring us details about the situation on the ground. Thank you for joining us here on Mirror Now. Can you tell us what the current situation is like in Ukraine after Russian president said, that he ordered, in fact, troops to the eastern part of Ukraine, and later we saw a statement coming from Ministry of Foreign Ministry, in fact, saying that, for now they won't be moved. What's the situation on the ground like?
Well, currently our government is deciding about the next steps, and our president said that he wants actually diplomatic measures to be taken at the level of United Nations, OSCE. He said that Ukraine doesn't want to have war with Russia. Of course, what Russia did is a violation of Ukrainian sovereignty and territorial integrity.
What is it that the locals really are saying? How is the sentiment on the ground?
Oh, well, of course, Ukrainians are more nervous right now. And, yesterday, Vladimir Putin gave a very long speech, actually, in which he was explaining why he basically hates Ukraine, why he hates the existence of Ukraine as a democratic country, why he thinks that Ukraine should be basically taken back to USSR. This is very disturbing to have such a neighbor who is delusional, who thinks that, he can turn back the time and recreate some, empires that don't exist anymore. So yeah, Ukrainians, but overall, They understand that there is a big threat from Russia, from Putin, but at the same time, Ukrainians are very determined. And according to sociological polls, almost half of Ukrainians are ready to take weapons if Russia decides to invade the whole Ukraine. There will be massive resistance among civilian population.
All right, Tulina, appreciate you joining us here on Mirror Now this evening and helping us understand how the situation is on the ground. With crisis in Ukraine worsening, the Indian government has issued an advisory for Indian nationals to leave the country. There are over 20,000 Indians in Ukraine and most of them are students. We are now joined by Avinash Chaturvedi, who is an Indian student in Ukraine. Avinash, thank you very much for joining us here on Mirror Now. Can you tell us how is the situation right now?
Not for the local people, but yes, for the foreign student, it's kind of a test. And we are not facing that much because we are far from the borders, like 800 kilometers, approximately 800 kilometers. But we are having the friends there in like Kyiv and Kharkiv. Those cities are on the borders. They are hearing many things and they are facing some things also. And we have heard about the explosions on the border cities and they are getting transferred to new place. Like they are shifting to city named as Kyiv and Lviv here. So these news makes us tensed. That's why we are getting out of this country as soon as possible.
Avinash, you're telling us that you're at least far away from the border area right now. Could you just show us around where you are and how the situation is around you, where you stay?
Yeah, but there's nothing to show. It's kind of usual. There is a balcony. I can show you. See, there's less people here outside, but yeah, everything is going usual.
All right. Avinash, thank you very much for joining us here on Mirror Now this evening. In fact, first flight that India had sent to Ukraine is going to return back in the national capital at around 11:30 tonight with about 250 odd passengers, and more flights are expected to be operated between India and Ukraine, New Delhi and Ukraine specifically over the next few days as well, to bring back those who immediately wish to come back to India. With this, we will slip into a very, very short break, but there's lots lined up for you on the other side as well. Stay with us.